In the early 2000s, a phenomenon known as home theater in a box put together an entire home theater system in a small box. Due to the popularity of DVD, people had noticed the video quality was awesome, but also they could have awesome surround sound in a very small setup, such as this Denon setup we have here. The DHT-700DV was a 5-speaker system including a powered subwoofer, which we have here, the DSW-27, which had an amplifier on the back as well, was said to deliver 35 watts at 4 ohms. We'll see the specs here of the subwoofer system, a 5¼ inch woofer, frequency range 30 hertz to 200 hertz, 35 watts RMS, and there's the weight, 13.2 pounds as well. Now, I have one of these left over from way back in the early 2000s when I bought one of these home theater systems. Unfortunately, the receiver DVD player part is no good anymore, was tossed years ago, but we do still have the subwoofer and it still works. And here you can see it. There's a port on the front that is visible and amplifier on the back, and that's really it. You can't see the woofer itself because this is a 4th order bandpass enclosure, which is a sealed enclosure firing into a ported enclosure, but we'll get to that in a minute here once we take it apart. But yeah, this thing is pretty small overall and dimension-wise. We'll get to that here briefly, but you can see there's not a lot going on, and it does have feet on the bottom, so it will stand off your floor a little bit. But going back to dimensions, it is approximately 8.3 inches wide, 11.2 inches tall by 12 inches deep. And here you can see my hand over the 3-inch port here on the front. Again, the woofer is hidden inside. We will show that later in the video. Well, let's go ahead and take this amplifier board here off the back so that we can take a closer look and see it. And we'll also get it detached here from the speaker terminals, which are on the inside, so that we can pull this apart and, take it to the dyno here eventually. But we're going to take a closer look at it to see what it's all about. Here on the back, you can see the DSW-27. You see the serial number. It does have an RCA input, a volume control, and a frequency control, as well as a power LED, and that's really all there is to it. And there's a glimpse of the woofer itself. 3.6 ohms is what we measured here using the ohm meter. And there is that 5¼ inch woofer. Yeah, we won't call it a subwoofer because it's not really. But let's go ahead and take the 4 screws of this woofer / subwoofer out so we can take a closer look at the driver itself. And again, these home theater boxes had really small speakers and are usually really small subwoofers as well. And this one is not abnormal from how these were set up and how these were. But there you can see it. It looks like a typical, car speaker or so, 5¼ inch. Nothing too beefy, nothing with a really long stroke or anything. But there you have it. And just a very simple 5¼ inch woofer. It still works today, which is impressive after all these years. But there you have it. Again, pretty interesting to see a quote-unquote subwoofer in such a small enclosure, but here's the amplifier and the transformers there at the bottom. It does have some processing at the top. We'll get to the internals of this later in the video, but I thought it would be fun to get this thing hooked up to the amp dyno so we can find out if this thing really does the 35 watts that it's rated. On the amp dyno, we'll see the power output in watts on the left. The ohm load is in the middle. And the voltage dyno won't matter for this because it is a 120 volt item.
You know how them sine waves go?
First up, we'll try it at 8 ohms. There's no ratings provided. The test will be at 40 hertz. The certified test takes us up to 1% distortion. And there you go, 28 watts at 8 ohms, up to 1% distortion, so not bad. Makes us think that we're probably going to get that 35 at 4 ohms. Uncertified takes us up to the clipping point. As you can see, we get a couple more watts here, 30 watts at 8 ohms uncertified, and then we'll run the dynamic burst track, which sends a 40 hertz pulse tone into the amp, and right about the same, in fact, it is the same as the uncertified test, 30 watts at 8 ohms. Now let's recalibrate the dyno here for 4 ohms. The amplifier is rated 35 watts RMS at 4 ohms. Here's our test certified. We get 39 watts, very nice, at 4 ohms. Now, next we'll run the test uncertified up to the clipping point. Should get a little bit more. And we do 44 watts into 4 ohms up to the clipping point. And finally here we will run the dynamic test, which sends a pulse track, and look at this. We're easing up on 50, 47 watts dynamically at 4 ohms, 40 hertz. Here are all the results we just showed of all the tests. We can't test efficiency because we didn't have that part connected. But there you can see, yeah, this amp actually did its rated power, which is impressive. Now we'll take off some screws off the back here so that we can pull the amplifier module off of this back plate so we can take a closer look at it. It just has this metal shield around it, which has the amplifier board separated from the power transformer and separated from the input controls there, which are at the top. But here you can see at the bottom we do have the power transformer, 18.5 VA times 2. It's Chainmate Industrial Company Limited. And here we have the guts of the amplifier itself. It did pass quality control back in the day. It is version 1.0. We do have some caps here as well. And we're going to talk about the big ones, and we'll also talk about the transistors there at the back. We have 4700 microfarad 35 volt caps from Jun Fu, must be Kung's brother.
This is not a Mickey Mouse program!
And the transistors here are A1635 and C4008 TO220 PNP power transistors. Now let's get this thing plugged back in so that we can actually try it as a subwoofer or a woofer and see how it sounds. We'll just get the back plate back on, get the screws back in, and let's get it powered back up. Just for fun and to show different test tones and what the speaker's capable of, we're going to show the IMSG Plus from SMD Demore Engineering. So we'll get this hooked up to the RCA jack here on the top of this unit, and we'll get it plugged into the RCA of the amplifier on the subwoofer so that we can try it out. And again, we'll run a sweep and see how it handles the different frequencies. Again, this is not really a subwoofer, but we'll find out how it performs. Well, this was just something I was curious about. I've had this subwoofer, like I said, for over 20 years, and I'm always kind of curious, about how much power it put out. I remember this back in the day. I actually bought it for kind of like a bedroom setup because I got it really cheap with the whole home theater system, and it always sounded okay. I could tell the subwoofer was not very powerful, but you have to remember the bookshelf speakers had like 2.5-inch speakers with tweeters, so didn't have a whole lot going on there. But we also tried this amp here at 2.6 ohms using the dynamic burst. It didn't do any more power than at 4 ohms, so it's pretty much a 4 ohm amp. But then we also tried it at 2 ohms. Here we'll wire it to 2 ohms here on the amp dyno, run the dynamic track, again 40 hertz pulse track, see if we get any more power. Hold on to your hats, here we go. And boom, 50 watts, 2 ohms dynamic. Big D, I'm out.